America, often hailed as the land of the free and the home of the brave, finds itself on the brink of an existential crisis. As the upcoming election looms, the divisions that have long simmered beneath the surface will explode into full view, becoming more extreme and irreversible. If you believe the election results will bring peace, you are gravely mistaken. No matter who is declared the winner, there will be violence. The divisions are so deep that neither side will accept the results. This situation is not unique to America. It reflects a broader failure of Western governments, which have repeatedly failed their people. The time has come for Western men to stop being cowards, step up, and take action. Talk is cheap, and only decisive action will prevent the coming chaos. The solution to this impending crisis is clear: a peaceful national divorce where red states and blue states go their separate ways. This idea, once considered radical and fringe, has gained serious traction in recent years. The differences in attitudes, values, and cultures between these regions are so profound that finding common ground is no longer possible. Having spent 15 years living in a red state and 30 years in a blue state, I have witnessed these differences firsthand. People in blue states often see themselves as cultured and sophisticated, looking down on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as outdated relics of a bygone era. In contrast, those in red states hold these documents in the highest regard, seeing them as the foundation of American freedom and prosperity. Western governments, especially those in the United States and Europe, have failed their people in numerous ways. They have allowed the erosion of national sovereignty, failed to protect their borders, and prioritized globalist agendas over the well-being of their own citizens. The ongoing migrant crisis is a prime example of this failure. Millions of people have been allowed to enter sovereign nations without proper vetting, overwhelming public services, and creating social and economic instability. The government's primary responsibility is to protect its citizens and its borders, yet it has failed spectacularly in this regard. This failure has left Western societies fractured and vulnerable, setting the stage for inevitable conflict. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we witnessed the extent to which governments could exert control over their citizens' lives, often under the guise of public safety. In blue states, the response to the pandemic took on an almost religious fervor. Those who followed government mandates were considered virtuous, while those who resisted were vilified as selfish and dangerous. This division further deepened the cultural chasm between red and blue states. Red states, by contrast, quickly moved away from these draconian measures, prioritizing individual freedom over government control. This stark difference in how the pandemic was handled is just one example of the irreconcilable differences that exist between these two Americas. The failures of Western governments have been compounded by the complacency of Western men. For too long, men in Western societies have been content to sit back and let others dictate the course of their lives. They have allowed themselves to be cowed by political correctness, afraid to speak out or take action for fear of being labeled as extremists or bigots. This cowardice has only emboldened those who seek to undermine the values and principles that have made the West strong. It is time for Western men to stop being cowards and step up to defend their families, their communities, and their way of life. Talk is cheap. It is easy to complain about the state of the world from the comfort of your home, but it takes real courage to take action. The time for talking is over. The divisions in our society are too deep, and the stakes are too high to rely on rhetoric alone. Western men must be willing to take a stand, even if it means making personal sacrifices. This may mean relocating to a state or region where your values are upheld, or it may mean getting involved in local politics to ensure that your community is protected from the encroaching influence of those who do not share your beliefs. A peaceful national divorce is the most viable solution to the current crisis. The idea of forcing red and blue states to remain united despite their profound differences is a recipe for disaster. As tensions continue to rise, the likelihood of violence increases. A national divorce would allow each side to govern itself according to its own values and principles, reducing the potential for conflict. Those who cling to the notion that the United States must remain united at all costs are deluding themselves. History has shown that forced unions are rarely successful in the long term. If we are to avoid the horrors of civil war, we must be willing to consider alternative solutions. Some may argue that such a separation would weaken the United States on the global stage, but the reality is that a divided nation is already weak. The divisions within our society make it impossible to present a united front to the rest of the world. A national divorce would allow each new nation to focus on its own interests and priorities, potentially making both stronger and more resilient. Moreover, the idea that the United States must remain a global superpower at all costs is another manifestation of the failure of Western governments. Instead of focusing on global dominance, we should be prioritizing the well-being and security of our own citizens. The ongoing migrant crisis is a direct result of the failure of Western governments to protect their borders and their people. This crisis is not the result of a spontaneous desire by millions of people to seek a better life. It is the result of a deliberate agenda by those in power to undermine national sovereignty and erode the cultural identity of Western nations. By flooding Western societies with migrants who do not share the same values or cultural heritage, these governments are sowing the seeds of future conflict. The resources of a nation are meant to benefit its citizens, not be squandered on those who have no legal right to be there. If you are still unconvinced of the need for action, consider what a future civil war might look like. Think back to the summer of 2020, when cities across the United States were engulfed in violence and chaos. Now imagine that scene playing out nationwide, not just in the cities but in small towns as well. The violence will be indiscriminate, and no one will be able to remain neutral. You will be forced to pick a side, whether you want to or not. This is the future that awaits us if we do not take action now. Western men have a choice to make. They can continue to be cowards, sitting idly by as their societies crumble around them, or they can step up and take responsibility for the future of their nations. The time for talking is over. Talk is cheap, and it will not save us from the coming storm. Only decisive action will. The solution is clear: a peaceful national divorce that allows red and blue states to go their separate ways, preserving their values and way of life. The alternative is civil war, and the consequences of that are too terrible to contemplate. In conclusion, the failures of Western governments have brought us to the brink of civil war. The divisions within our society are too deep to be reconciled through dialogue alone. Western men must stop being cowards and take action to protect their families, communities, and way of life. The time for talk is over. Now is the time for action. The choice is clear: national divorce or civil war. Which side are you on? Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.